To Mr. Winston Jordan, you is a great man to the Guyanese citizen. As a minister to the South America land called Guyana, so much negative, so much propaganda. The PPP are trying to tell upon you, but keep speaking the truth. The truth is always there forever. The best finance minister I ever seen in Guyana. Oh yeah, Lord, please guide and protect him each and every day. He is full of knowledge and experience and things that going on in this country. Jordan is a cool and humble man. He educate and dedicate to the society. Over 30 years he give to we in this ministry. Yeah, yeah. Jordan is for all. Lord, no, you will always stand tall. Tall. Yeah. Oh yeah. I am a Guyanese citizen. I never meet you and I never talk to you, but for you good works you have done for this country. I'm singing this song to you, Mr. Winston Jordan. We as Guyanese citizens saying we love you. Yes, we love you. Lord, let no weapon that come against him shall prosper. Lord, you is the God from heaven. You is the God from heaven. Oh, honors and respect to Mr. Winston Jordan. Guyanese, we love you, Winston Jordan. Yeah, yeah.
Minister reads the budget speech, there is an important motion that is uh, raised by a member of the government. I think it was Tashir in this case, who will ask that all other business of the House be suspended to allow the Minister of Finance or whoever is reading the budget speech, acting in that capacity, to engage in the presentation uninterrupted. That's the important word, uninterrupted. All right. So a hundred and something page double space or triple space speech should not take more than 3 hours to be read uninterrupted. And even if there are a bit of byplay here and there and so on, still you will be within the 3.5 hours. But the spectacle that was witnessed on Monday, I believe the government and the speaker should review where this is going, because it's not the first time it has happened. It has continued since the government has returned, and increasingly you're getting these long, torturous speeches. Of course, people will say, well, you could go and read the document afterwards. That is true. But sometimes listening and gives you more intent and more purpose, and what is the intent and purpose of the government sometimes, and how it's conveyed, than just go and read in the back. But anyhow, that is what my view where that is concerned. And recall that Monday morning, when I was on that special budget, I did recommend that perhaps the format of the presentation should change, where the speech concentrates on the priorities, the important things, the sectoral developments, and so on, and allow the others during the debate, because happily during the debate, every elected MP of the House gets an opportunity to say something, okay? Those who are ministers of government, they will get 30 minutes plus an extra 5 to wrap up. Those who are shadowing ministers on the opposition benches, they also will get 30 minutes plus 5 minutes to wrap up. All other MPs, non-minister MPs, and non-shadow of ministers MPs will get 15 minutes plus 5 minutes wrap up. So it's a question of how you organize, okay? I mean, who wants to hear how many governors are going to be bought for trucks, 8,000 governors and 10,000 fowls laid, 2 million eggs? Who wants this minutia? Who wants this kind of details in a speech? Concentrate on the more broad policies, concentrate on the strategic orientation, concentrate on the vision and the accomplishment of that vision. Give us a broad swath of what we can expect over the next 5 years, and so on, as an introductory budget, instead of all this minutia of, 8,000 governors, 2,000 cars, 10,000 onions, 3,000 limes. I mean, I think we can dispense with that in the speech and allow the MPs and the other ministers to concentrate on the granular details in their presentation. But eventually, I gave up and I decided to read later on. But someone asked me to describe the budget in 3 words. And immediately what came to mind is Inklebort Humpeldink's those 3 little words. But I could not describe this budget in that manner. You all might not be too old enough to remember Inklebort Humperdinck. Those 3 little words, I love you, not this budget. So I decided to, as a quick reaction, said my 3 little words were reckless, thoughtless, and heartless. And that is my quick summation of this budget. Reckless in the sense that once again, we are treated to a historic, massive budget. In this case, $1.558 trillion at a time, reckless at a time when the outlook, the world and regional outlook will indicate tempering expectations and tempering expenditure as you go forward, right? It's the whole issue of how trade patterns are developing, the whole throwing of multilateralism into the sea. So it's very fluid and evolving, and one does not want to throw oneself in the deep end. One should be in a budget that is more conservative, cautious, while at the same time seeking to achieve the broad developmental goals of any society. In this 1.558, as the government continues this reckless spending that is contributing to the high inflation that is being experienced, I thought that somewhere along the line, they did not get the message. I thought that it was thoughtless because it failed to balance the physical requirements of the country with the equally important human development side. And that has been a feature of budgets post-2020 as concrete has replaced sweat. And as I indicated somebody 2 days ago, I think we have had concrete up our gazoozle. And there's only so much we're choking on concrete. And maybe that is assisting us towards death. The government's approach to all 1970s style economics called trickle down, where you put monies in the hands of the few, the contractors and suppliers and so on, as you engage in these large projects, needed as they are, but because they're not sequenced properly, they are being thrown at you one and at the same time, in the hope that gains will trickle down to the broader masses of the society by way of jobs, wages, other incomes, and so on. But we have had 5 years of trickle down economics since this government has returned in 2020. And as you could see, and as we will see later on in this discourse, instead of declining, poverty has remained stubbornly high. And according to the IDB, it's at 58%. So 58% of the people are watching their dreams float by, while a small niche continues to gorge at the trough. So this budget was thoughtless. And it's not only me saying this. My observations are coming towards the tail end of the budget to this Friday. But if you read all newspapers that are not government, and you read the social media and so on, the general consensus is that this is not a people's budget. It's not a people's force budget. And that if you really, really, really want to give them that broad message of people force, it's a tiny set of people that the budget is geared to. And I thought the budget was heartless because, notwithstanding the continuous cries, as evidence, for example, in the daily, in the weekly, what the people say column, among others, the cries of the ordinary people, the very poor, that same 58%, and even more the 32% who are in extreme poverty. The cries of the poor of cost of living, the cries of the middle class about cost of living. Notwithstanding that, what the government sought to do as a backhand way of acknowledging that indeed these cries are genuine is to offer nothing more than crumbs. And we will look at them under the whole issue of what they call budget measure. Crumbs. At 20,000 a year here, another 5,000 a year there. And their whole ability to fool people and get away with it. And you will show how promises made during the hectic campaign season have not turned out to be promises kept, even in the force budget. And this is always coming from what I have said on this program over and over again. We are in a governance framework in this country that starts out with some divine right to run this country. Some idea that this Guyana is somebody's plantation, and that everybody who are not part of that small elite are rentiers on this plantation. And therefore, search for better governance cannot come because you don't own this plantation or you are not part of the ownership of this plantation. That is the idea I get. And that is the idea coming from a person whose foreparents arrived here in chains 400 years ago this year. That is the observation being made by one of their progeny. And it's not an alarmist observation. It's one that I've been making all the time. And I'm one of several people who have come to that realization. that we are in a governance framework that is increasingly marginalized a significant number of people of various races, but none more so than Guyanese of African descent. They're not a major part of the business class in this country, but yet the wealth of this country is steered toward the business class, the contractor class, and that small group and clique of friends of the government who benefit massively, directly and indirectly. They benefit massively, directly and indirectly, and we will come to that too. So you have that scenario: reckless, thoughtless, and heartless. That's my summing up in a few words, in those three little words of the budget. So, yes, we learned on Monday that this year's budget is going to be $1.558 trillion, right? That's trillion with 12 zeros, right? Trillion is one with 12 zeros. So a trillion essentially is a million or 1,000 billion. That's the realm within which we are speaking. And that 2026 budget represents the third consecutive $1 trillion budget. The third consecutive $1 trillion budget. And if you look at that budget alone, 1.558 trillion, that budget, the 2026 budget, is more than the entire monies that were available to the coalition government between March 2020 and August the 2nd, March 2015 and August the 2nd, 2020. What an astonishing comparison. For during that period, March 2015 to August 2020, available to the coalition was $1.347 trillion. $1.347 trillion. And that was less than what was spent last year, because according to the estimates and the budget speech, the latest projection of spending for last year was $1.45 trillion. $1.45 trillion, in excess of what was available for the entire coalition period. These kinds of comparisons, these stark comparisons, must be made over and over and over and over, because those who claim to support the coalition, not everybody, of course, and definitely those who don't or who never did support it, always put out there that the coalition had massive sums of money, or that the coalition didn't do this during their time, and so on. And I'm hoping that you're getting a better understanding. I hope you're getting a better understanding that a government, last year alone, what they spent for last year alone was more than the entire expenditure undertaken by the coalition government in its 5+ years. So next time you want to say, oh, they didn't do this and they didn't do that and so on, spare a thought for the availability of monies, much less its composition, because we ain't got time to go through the composition, how they spend it and so on. But that is that. And you can bet your bottom dollar that this 1.558 trillion is, you ain't gonna hear the last of this, because during the year, if we are to follow what happened since 2020, they are going to repeatedly come for supplementary. So this 1.558 is a base figure. By the end of 2026, based on how many supplementaries they came for and how many they took before they came for approval of the expenditure, this figure may well be in excess. Because do recall that last year's budget was about 338 billion. But yet still you ended up with 1.4 trillion, 1.338 trillion or thereabout. But yet still you end up with a revised estimate of 1.4 plus trillion. Why? And as you can see why. In addition to coming to the Parliament for supplementary provisions just prior to the closure of the Parliament last year, they also took $18+ billion in supplementary between the period November 24th to December the 12th. In less than a month, they had raided the contingencies fund of $18 billion. And perhaps we will look at that another time and understand how Parliament is, when it comes to oversight of expenditure and treatment of expenditure and use of the contingency fund, how the Parliament is being treated as a joke. Because when you look at the $18 billion+, 99% of what was spent in that period could not qualify as an emergency expenditure, as an unforeseen expenditure, as an unbudgeted. They could not qualify. How does miscellaneous roads during the period November 24th to December the 12th qualify as unbudgeted, emergency, and so on? And this being done in the context of a Parliament that was reopened in October. So when they opened the Parliament, they could have gone with a supplementary paper for the attention of Parliament and get the Parliament to approve the supplementary paper for them to continue the spending. But they did not do that. They did not do that. They waited until the last moment to open the Parliament because the elections were conducted on September the 4th. The results were known by the next week. The cabinet and everybody was sworn in September, and yet still we were opening Parliament on the last day. Statutorily, the statutory deadline for the opening of Parliament. And even when you opened the Parliament, there was no other sitting of that Parliament until last week, Monday. But then you gone to the contingency fund and claim thing. You've seen this kind of picture before. Create a situation so that you don't use the formal processes, and then you use, in the previous case, the doctrine of necessity. In this case, the doctrine of the account of necessity is the contingencies fund. You see the parallels that are being drawn? You see the muddying of the water that is taking place, even when they have oversight bodies. But anyway, so this budget is 12.3% larger than last year's budget figure. 12.3% larger. You see what when I said it was reckless, what I meant? It is 12.3% larger than last year's budget. And it's 7.5% bigger than the latest estimate for last year. Now, this budget assumes that oil prices, it assumes an average oil price of $59 a barrel. $59 a barrel, which, according to most predictions, is on the high side, given the medium and long-term forecast for oil, given the developments that took place in Venezuela, given Trump's stated aim of bringing oil prices down to about $50 a barrel. On November the 3rd of this year, oil prices on that day was US $58 a barrel. $58 a barrel. So already, if that trend were to continue, this budget will be in trouble. Now we have to be concerned. Why? Because this big budget of $1.558 trillion is financed as follows. The regular tax and other revenues is expected to bring in $514 billion. $514 billion. Then they have what are called GRIF inflows and carbon credits, right? That is the HES monies, the monies that HES has promised us to 2030. When you add that, disbursement plus any GRIF inflows that came from the Norway Fund and so on, that's $58 billion that is being projected. The reckless part of why I'm saying this budget comes also from the intended withdrawals from the Natural Resource Fund. The government intends to withdraw approximately $495 billion from our Natural Resource Fund. This government, up to the end of last year, had available to it in the Natural Resource Fund $8.5 billion. In the first round, when they sought to destroy the 2019 Natural Resource Fund Act and replace it with the 2021 Act, part of that act allowed them to withdraw the entire sum, over 600 something million US dollars, that was in the fund at that time, and that was accumulated under the coalition government between for the year 2020 and 2021, at the time when Lisa 1 was mostly the one that was producing. Over 600 something million was wiped out, bringing the fund balance to zero. And as the fund accumulated more funds, notwithstanding the more generous formula that they had put in the 2021 Act, by 2024, not satisfied, they went and changed the formula that effectively would result in depletion of the fund. So now today, you have enough fund. After they will have drawn out this sum of money, the fund balance would be roughly just over $1 billion US. Insufficient to act as buffers in a situation if oil prices continue to fall. So they're going to draw out $495 billion from the fund to finance this budget. We don't know where this $495 billion doing, because according to the act, as they draw, they're supposed to dump it in the consult fund, where, like when you throw a pebble in the ocean, it disappears. So all you will see is the notion or the action of the throwing of the pebble, and then you will see that ring that forms when the pebble hits the water, and then it will disappear. Both the stone and those rings will disappear. And that's what happens to a Natural Resource Fund. No one could tell you what the Natural Resource Fund is financing. Whenever you ask, they say it is financing development priorities. What are these development priorities? No one can tell you, because the Natural Resource Fund could not be financing all development priorities that I have in this country. No one could tell you. No one can tell you. And this unfortunately, is a point, even though picked up by one or two people, has not gained traction in the press and in the wider society. They don't understand and appreciate that the NRF is a windfall account. Should be treating oil income as a windfall revenue and not part of the general revenue. Why? Oil is finite. The income from oil is finite. And so you can't treat with those funds to finance what you call running expenditure. Because when they disappear, how are you going to continue the running expenditure? Those funds should be used for critical projects to support the development of the country. Those projects should be identified and form the basis of consensus in the society. Those projects should be known and they should be accurate and fair reporting to the parliament so that we will constantly understand and appreciate where those funds are going. But we don't get that. So let's add the three numbers. We're financing a $1.558 trillion budget with taxes of $514 million, carbon credits and GRIF of $58 million, and NRF withdrawals, natural resource fund withdrawals of $495 billion. 514 billion, 495 billion, and 58 billion, which leaves a massive gap of $491 billion to be financed. To be financed. $491 billion to be financed. But just before we look at that gap, as I said to you, the Natural Resource Fund principally depends on where oil is going. They project, obviously, an average price in the budget that is lower than even last year's average price. And last year's average price was lower than 2024 average price. So you could see, notwithstanding the cushioning of the impact of declining prices on income through the ramping up of oil production, whether through the addition of more FPSOs, those floating platforms, and the ramping up in excess of the capacity of these FPSOs, as is in the case of every one of the 4 FPSOs that are out there on our shelf. So notwithstanding that this ramp-up production will more or less mitigate the loss of income coming from a lower price, you have a couple effects there. Let me show you. Last year, they produced 261 billion barrels. And those 261 billion barrels, according to the balance of payment, were exported and earned 17 billion 797 million US dollars. 17 billion 797 million US dollars. Those 261 million barrels that were pumped from off the shelf. In 2026, it is now budgeted that production will be ramped up to 307 million barrels. 307 million barrels. But this 307 million barrels is projected to earn 17 billion 957 million US dollars. What's the difference between these two? Right? The difference between these two is, let me do a quick calculation there. That will be 160, roughly 160 million US dollars. So an additional 46 million barrels will be earning roughly 160 million US dollars. And when you do the quick calculation, you will see the average price there is $34.78 a barrel. So that is even below, even considerably below the average price that is assumed even in 2026. So we need to do our homework, which is not what we're doing. Because in times like these is when the absence of a depletion policy on the shelf in Guyana is going to hurt us. Is going to hurt us. And you can see it here already. Let me just go over that quickly because maybe you didn't get it yet. Last year they produced 261 million barrels. And those 261 million barrels earned the country 17,797,000,000 United States dollars. This year, they expect to produce 307 million barrels, which is 46 million barrels more. But these 46 million barrels more will only earn an extra 161 million US dollars, or at an average of $34.78 per barrel, which is considerably less than even the average 58 that they're assuming in this budget, 59 that they're assuming in this budget. So we are pumping more to earn less than we earned last year. So that's one negative. The other negative, and the biggest of the negatives, is that we are going to have to be pumping more barrels to pay off Exxon's debt, that the amount of money that they invested. When price is high, it will take us less barrel. Let us do a quick example. Let us say Exxon invested $1,000 and they got to get back their 1,000. And let us say prices are $75. So let us say it will take us, let us say prices are $100 quick. So it'll take us, say, 10 barrels, right, for them to get back the investment. But if that price slumps to $50, as you can see what will happen now, it now requires us to give them 20 barrels to get the same $1,000 investment. So as that price sinks further and further, Guyana is going to find itself, and without a depletion policy, what we mean by depletion policy in this case? In this case, if we had a depletion policy in place, it would have restricted how much Exxon could take out of the ground if prices fell to a certain level. That's to make certain that us and our future generations don't get robbed, if we want a better word. But now without a depletion policy, the more the price falls, is the more Exxon will pump. They're not losing. Why? Because they have storage capacity. They can store the oil until the prices go up. We do not have storage capacity. And so we have to sell our oil at any price that is dictated to us. And that is why 5, 6 years after force oil, we still do not have in place a sales policy. We are still selling oil at spot. We are still selling oil at spot, which is the oil is produced today and we sell at what price is on the market. We have not engaged ourselves in forward contracts. We have not engaged ourselves in long-term contracts to hedge against the risk of falling oil prices. You don't have to necessarily engage all your oil in forward contract. You could hedge between long-term contracts and selling spot and so on. But this kind of sophistry has not engaged the attention of the government. And so we are at the hit and miss level. If prices are good at 100, we sell at spot, we get that good price. But when the prices begin to fall, as they seem to be trending now, we are in trouble because we have no contractual markets, no forward markets, and so on. And that will have a knock-on effect on the economy. Because when you're using natural resource fund money to finance any and everything, when that fund gets depleted or the income runs so low and you don't have buffers, then number of things can happen. Your GDP will fall off because you have to cut back on those projects, or you have to mothball some of them, and you have impacts like employment. People lose employment, and a lot of banks run into trouble because people go and take housing loans on the strength that they have an employment and so on. When they lose employment, they can't pay the mortgage, they lose the mortgage, banks become now a rentier and a house owner instead of intermediating our finances, our savings, and so on. So you have all those knock-on effects. That is why this budget is seen to be reckless of its size and magnitude at a time when caution and conservatism should have pervaded the whole exercise. So you have that. Now you're back to the borrowing. You need to borrow $491 billion to finance this budget. You see, the minister, the one who went out there and crowed. And this budget is being financed with no new taxes. That is what he said, and his fellow trumpeters and so on in the parliament knock desks and knock glass. They don't understand the implication of these things. No new taxes. All that means is that the burden of financing today's budget deficit will fall on the future generation. So you're just postponing the implementation of taxes. If you're financing a budget with no new taxes, but it's a deficit of $491 billion, what do you think you have to do? You have to borrow. And who's paying back the borrowing? Not the future generations. So you're just postponing the inevitability, and you're engaging in reckless debt policies, because today you have an opportunity to restructure your taxes, but we'll come back to that. And let's not be fooled about no new taxes. All budgets, unless they are zero budgets, they are zero-based budgets, that with inflation that can be considered to be negligible, then all budgets will have an implicit tax in it once an inflation figure is mentioned. And if we really want to believe that the $1.558 trillion budget is going to generate a mere 2.5% inflation for the entire 2026, I think you must believe in miracles. But let us just use the 2.5% for the time being, because that is what is in the budget. The 2.5% inflation is a tax. it's a tax. Because by definition, a tax reduces disposable income. However levied, it results in less disposable income. Disposable income, once again, is your gross income less taxes and social security. But we're not dealing with the social security now. Less taxes equal disposable income. So when you have inflation, your disposable income will buy less goods. So that's an implicit tax. So there's don't run away with no new taxes story. And then of course, no new taxes doesn't tell you about the incidence of taxes, the incidence that will occur between products or between classes or between sectors and so on. But then let's don't think that. I just trying to point out we should never run away clapping and hollering about no new taxes, because ultimately, as we can see, taxes come in different forms, right? And whether you call it the tax or other imposts, it comes and has the same effect, which is to reduce the ability to purchase, reduce your ability to purchase, and consequently reduce your standard of living. So that's an aside, but a necessary aside. So we back to the borrowing. We back to the borrowing. When this government came in 2019, sorry, in 2020, I think if I could remember off the top of my head that the public debt was roughly 1.8 billion US dollars, of which the external part of that debt was roughly 1.1 billion US dollars. With this level of borrowing, it is now projected that in 2026, the public debt will reach a staggering 10.3 billion US dollars. And as of the end of last year, it was 7.7 billion US dollars. 7.7 billion US dollars. So another 2.6 billion US dollars will be added to the debt in 2026. The external debt is projected to rise from 2.239 billion US dollars last year to about 2.92 billion US dollars this year. While the domestic debt, incredibly, is expected to rise from 4.8 billion last year to about 7.4 billion dollars this year. US dollars. They try to keep it clean. There's no shortage of where these people will go to debt, to contract a debt. Even as we were coming on here, we were reading that the latest debt taken by the government was a loan of 7.2 billion Guyana dollars that was signed with Japan for the water and sanitation sector. Now you would think all these loans that they've taken for water, and all of these water treatment plants that they've opened all across the country, that one, water quality will be better, two, water supply would be better. But anybody on this life who could just put a thumbs up on the quality of water and the supply of water that they get, I would say that the government would achieve something. But up to yesterday, even in the blackout, and attempting to brush my teeth, I figured something must be wrong with the water. When I look, it looked like creek water coming through. It looked like untreated water. Smelled a bit, which I must investigate also because this water clearly can't be coming from our well here. When I moved into South in January of 1981, we had lovely a well down here giving clean well water and so on. Now here our water coming from somewhere in Cummins Lodge and so forth. But the long and short is we are going to reap the whirlwind of these poor, boring policies and even more poor projects that they are financing. Even more poor projects that they are financing. As I said by now, with all of the spending in the water sector, we will have expected a better quality of water, a more consistent flow of water. But yesterday the water disappeared even when the light went, which was something I found to be new, because at least you will get some water when the light go. But yesterday the water disappeared, right? When the light went. But we come back to what I'm saying. That is that the rate at which they are borrowing doesn't give anybody comfort. And let's be very, very clear. They talk a lot in the budget speech about stability and the borrowing is within limits and ratios and so on. Let me say something. Let me say something. The borrowing, when you put it on top of our gross domestic product, looks good. Looks good. It's just like our per capita GDP. Looks good. Our per capita GDP, for example, let me. I like giving these examples. Our per capita GDP, for example, has grown to. I think I had that figure somewhere. Has grown to about 20,000 plus US dollars. Now we in the high income bracket. But would anybody in their right mind in this country tell you and feel that they feel like a 29,000 US dollar per capita GDP? That is what these things do. Per capita is an average. Per capita is an average. So you take the whole GDP and you divide by them 900 something thousand people, and you end up with a per capita GDP that the international institutions love to talk about. Hold on, I think I have it here. Yes, there you go. Yes. The per capita GDP according to the budget at the end of 2025 was 26,554 US dollars. Each man, woman, and child in Guyana could claim 26,554 United States dollars. Does anybody in this country with 58% poverty feel like 26,554 United States dollars? So yes, they will regale you with, oh, well, don't worry, the borrowing is within limits, and these ratios are the lowest in the Western Hemisphere and so on. You know why these ratios might be among the lowest? Because the debt is being put on a GDP base that is not that it is false, but in the context of Guyana, it's false. Why? That base is influenced heavily by the production of oil. When that oil is produced, we can expect to get about 14.5% of it. The rest finds its way out. So even though oil earned 17 plus billion US dollars last year, that didn't come to Guyana. Or if it came, it didn't stay in Guyana. What stayed in Guyana was what went to the Natural Resource Fund. That is what we get. So when you put this massive 10 plus billion US dollars onto a GDP, most of it coming from Ireland, you don't control, it's a different story. Because when you put the debt on the rightful base, which is the non-oil GDP, suddenly you get a better picture. Suddenly you get a picture that puts you in distress. Because you're not going to pay back that debt from Exxon's money. You have to pay it back from the money that you earn and that which stays in the country. That is what you have to do. And why would anybody in the context of oil in this country be borrowing at this rate? Why? Because here's a government that is borrowing, but not accumulating monies in the natural resource fund. They are emptying the natural resource fund even as they borrow. We recognize this as the coalition government. We recognize that this could be an issue. And what did we do? We had drafted a new Public Debt Act. But unfortunately, when the no confidence motion came, we could not introduce it any longer into the parliament. And of course, this government is not about to restrict itself to that level of discipline. Every day you wake up, you see this government borrowing, a borrowing that is going to put us, especially in the context of falling oil prices, into a very severe situation down the road. Mark my words about this. We have traveled this road before when sugar prices fell out after the 1974 one-year quirk, and when oil prices shot through the roof. We experienced this for a prolonged period. And we're still suffering today, those massive deficits in various human resource, physical infrastructure, and so on. And yet, we don't seem to have learned from that lesson and the pain that it inflicted on us. Nearly half or more of our people left post-1976. Left. So we have to pay attention when we're hearing things like no new taxes. No new taxes. But you're running a massive fiscal deficit and not telling the people that you're substituting borrowing for taxes. Not telling the people that. 6 of one and half a dozen the other. Except that the borrowing falls on both the present and future generations, whereas taxes fall on this generation. How can we be saddling future generations with such massive debt? You people may say, well, but you are also giving them infrastructure. But then how can you then saddle future generations with such massive debt that is financing such poor infrastructure? Heavy cost overruns in some infrastructure, and so on. By the way, has anybody traveled on the East Coast Road recently? Whatever happened to that road? I see no activity going on there. Yet in the Mahaica area, you have lampposts in the middle of what is supposed to be a road. You have parts of that road that has not been done. The contractors seem to have demobilized. There's nothing going on there. I didn't hear anything said about it in the budget. All I heard was with the railway embankment road, but I didn't hear anything said about that road. But that road is a disaster. It's a disaster. It's another colossal waste of money. The intention was right. The implementation was wrong. And now, like, the contractor has demobilized because nothing is going on that East Coast Road. And certainly where in the areas of the Mahiko and so on, there's nothing going on there. And then, of course, you have the Concussion Road, where they budgeted massive sums, again, now to overlay the road with asphalt. Massive sums. So when you're borrowing monies and you're not really adding to the physical stock, you have to constantly go and repair things that you've done, and they can't last. They can't last, like the Linden Soosdijk Highway and so on. You're not only burdening future generations with this borrowing, but you're burdening them with poor infrastructure that they will then also have to borrow to repair or to make right. So we have to watch that carefully. And then, of course, they love to tell you about the growth. The growth. Well, the growth is happening. Last year, growth was recorded at 16.2%. Sorry, 19.3%. 19.3% real GDP growth. Higher than the projected growth, which was 10.6%. Now, here, that's a huge gap. That's a huge difference between budget and actual, when nothing spectacular happened, which gives rise to questionable projections. And I will show you how they are questionable just now again too. So you had budgeted growth last year of 10.6%, but then you realize a high 19.3%, almost double your projected growth. And in terms of the non-oil growth, the projection was closer. The budget for non-oil growth last year was 13.8%, and the actual was 14.3%. I don't know whether the budgeting was real or accidental in that case, but that was closer, far closer than the overall growth. This year, they're budgeting 16.2% growth, lower than last year, and clearly then showing, oh, sorry. Okay, so this year they're budgeting 16.2% compared with the 19.3% that was achieved last year, overall growth. And they are budgeting 10.8% for the non-oil growth this year compared with the 14.3% last year. So as you can see, even in their growth, they're budgeting reduced growth rates. They're budgeting reduced growth rates while incurring an alarming 12.3% increase in government expenditure. Make the two make sense. Make the two make sense. And that 16.2% growth that they're budgeting, if they get it, will be the lowest growth since 2021. So these figures are not trending in the right direction. You're having growth, but you're having growth at a lower rate. But more important, see what is happening here. The growth that they are expecting and realizing coincides with the arrival of another FPSO. So sometime this year, I think they expect another FPSO or early next year. And then you're going to see another jump in the growth again. So our growth is dependent on the arrival of FPSOs. When those FPSOs stop arriving, because they stop arriving when they reach at number 7 or number 8, something like that, What are we going to be projecting as growth? Are we building that so-called non-oil economy that we're talking about? Are we building that non-oil economy to take the place of the oil economy when the the oil production starts tapering off? Let us see how that is going. Let us see how that is going. At the production level, sugar, sugar, that is going to get another $13 billion plus in 2026. Yes, this black hole that we talked about since the coalition days, that sucked the life out of the coalition, is going to get another 13.2 billion. You see, sugar has become, in the economic jargon, too big to fail. When corporations reach that stage and that level of inefficiency, it's a different analysis that is put to it. You get this thing, well, Gaisuko, what it does for the rural community. So all of those arguments start coming in to justify the existence of the entity instead of being a reason why we should be looking at new vistas. This is what has happened to Gaisuko. And managers are not obligated to perform because they are in an entity that is too big to fail. Regardless of its failure, the government will find a reason to pour money into it. And that is what Gaisuko is. Gaisuko's production cost is 42 cents. The world market price is 15 cents. Tell me on what, excuse me, tell me on what grounds, what economic grounds, even societal grounds, can you continue with such an entity? But sugar, in 2019, produced 92,256 tons. Not 92,256 tons. But by 2024, sugar had produced less than half, or just about half what it produced in 2019. Production in 2024 was 47,103 tons. 47,103 tons, while it sucked in 2024 another $13+ billion. Last year, the government budgeted that sugar will produce 101,000 tons. But instead, it produced a mere 59,600 tons. You see why I got to laugh at these estimates that they produce? Is this budgeting? Guess what? In 2026, the government is again budgeting for Gaisuko to produce 100,041 tons. The last time Gaisuko produced in excess of 100,000 tons could well have been somewhere around 2015, 2016. How does a corporation whose best production was in 2025 of 59,600, how do they jump from there to 100,041? Are these numbers for real? Rice has been the only stellar crop among the sisters to still be up there. But as you well know, rice has its own problems. It has a problem of, of price, problem of storage, and everything else. But as usual, the government jumps in and perhaps spending the natural resource fund money to give rice farmers $300 a bag for paddy for the each of the two crops. 300 $300 a bag for a subsidy of in excess a cash subsidy that is in excess of $4.1 billion. Rice in 2019 produced 682,081 tons. But by 2024, it had dropped to 653,706 tons. In 2025, it was budgeted to produce 804,000 tons and eventually produce 810,229 tons. And in 2026, it budgeted for a slight increase of 827,500 tons. So they're on track. They're on track. The only problem with that, though, is that production is not translating into incomes. And once again, it is the government who has to talk to the farmers about efficiency gains so that they don't just go and plant rice and expect the government to pay them a price or the millers to pay them a price, even though it's at significant variance with the world market price. This is unfortunate in Guyana that we seem to not letting our businessmen and our farmers and whoever else understand that in the context of the market within which we have to operate, there's a level of assistance that the government can give, and the rest is going to have to be on the businesses to constantly reinvent themselves and improve their efficiency so they can stay ahead of the market. But instead, the government is giving the impression that this is a welfare state. We got monies and we can dole these monies out. There's no sense telling a farmer to produce when he ain't got markets, he ain't got access to markets, he ain't got access to distribution, and all of these different things. And there's no sense saying Guyana is the only country that could feed itself in self-sufficiency if that food is not being distributed across the country to meet the wide population. There's no sense producing a lot of food in Blackbush and it can't reach the market centers because it will then stay there and rot. So even though it will count as part of your GDP, it will not count as part of your welfare because it will rot there. The farmers will not get the income, the markets will not get access to the food, and so on. So all these feel-good things you hear in the papers, and when Guyana is the only country with self-sufficiency and so on, come here and see. Come here and see if that same so-called self-sufficiency is meeting the broad swath of the population. Gold in 2019, when gold price was under 2,000 US, gold declared 641,828, with a significant part of that coming from small and medium-sized farmers, local farmers, gold miners, sorry. By 2024, gold declaration had slumped to 434,067 ounces. The budget for 2025 had gold declaring 501,000 ounces. But in reality, gold only declared 481,321 ounces at a time when gold prices were the highest in the history. And up to last week or so, gold prices were almost topping 5,000 US dollars an ounce. Last year, all that was declared was 481,321 ounces, considerably less than what was declared in 2019 when the price was under $2,000 an ounce. And notwithstanding all the threats and noise and all kinds of things that the government put in place last year, notwithstanding the very generous concessions that the government has extended to the gold sector, last year's actual of 481,321 ounces was due mainly to the Chinese actor at Aurora Gold Mines. A significant increase in their declaration, I think a 45% increase in their declaration that has resulted in this number. So if we were to abstract that number, it means that the gold declaration from the small, artisanal, and middle miners has declined drastically, notwithstanding all the threats and so on. But what is even more unbelievable, though, is that for the 2026 budget, gold is budgeted to declare 510,450 ounces when gold prices are screaming at 5,000 US and expected to go higher because a lot of big economies are dumping dollars and purchasing gold, hoarding gold, because the confidence in the US dollars is being shaken at the moment. So people are substituting US dollars for gold. So that price is going to expect it to go higher. But all that the government can expect is 510,450 ounces, nowhere close to the 641,828 ounces that was produced 7 years ago in 2019. Bauxite. In 2019, bauxite produced 595,943 tons. 595,943 tons. By 2024, this had risen to 1.7 million. Last year, they budgeted to produce 4.4 million tons of bauxite. 4.4 million tons of bauxite. But the reality is they only produced 3.9 million tons. 3.9 million tons. So that's a significant shortfall of 500,000 tons of bauxite. And this year now, they're projecting to increase from 3.9 to 4.8 million. Well, we'll see how that goes. Again, these projections for 2026 look all suspect. Look all suspect. And why they are suspect? If we look at the outturn in 2025, with the exception of rice, whose budget was 804,000, but who overachieved at 810,229 tons, none of sugar, gold, nor bauxite achieved the targets. None. None. So either this is over ambitious targets, poor budgeting, or something else. And one then begins to question the efficacy of the 2026 targets in light of the miss the misachievement of the targets in 2025. In terms of the earnings, to show you all this talk about diversification and so on, and the huge sums of money that are being spent to diversify the economy, but this economy is very resistant to diversification, as it would seem. In fact, even the numbers bear it out. Of merchandise exports in 2024, merchandise exports was 19 billion 785 million. But in 2025, it was only 20 billion 138 million. And in 2026, it budgeted to be 20 billion 499 million. But let us look carefully what is happening here. Of the oil, of the merchandise imports, oil in 2024 accounted for 91% of our earnings. And this percentage was reduced in 2025 to 88%. And 2026 is expected to maintain 88%. So stop right there. The dominance of oil in our GDP, in our production, in our export earnings within 5 years of forced oil has been so pervasive as to nullify most, if not all, of the attempts that they said to diversify this economy. So obviously, something is not right and something is not working. Oil's dominance is so great in this economy as to be very scary. Of the other products, gold, rice, and bauxite in 2024 accounting for 7%. So essentially what we're saying, that of the merchandise exports in 2024, oil, gold, rice, and bauxite accounted for 98% of the earnings. Just those four products accounted for 98% of the earnings. In 2025, gold, rice, and bauxite accounted for 10% of the earnings. And gold, rice, bauxite, and oil would have accounted for 98% of our export earnings. 98% of our export earnings is concentrated among four products. And in 2026, the projection is for this to be even more concentrated. Gold, rice, and bauxite are projected to contribute 11% to merchandise export earnings in 2026. And gold, rice, bauxite, and oil are expected to contribute a staggering 99% of all the export earnings of this country. So in 2026, you had a budget just presented that extol how much diversification is happening in this country. But the evidence don't bear it out. Four products: oil, gold, rice, and bauxite are targeted to contribute 99% of the export earnings of this country. By the way, I heard that Rusal is coming back. They won't boost any production. They won't have any input into production in 2026 and maybe not even in 2027. But I understand they're back. And I understand that the Minister of Finance, either as part of his repartee or his anybody's speech or whatever I haven't gone on to this, blame the coalition government for Rusal's exit. Well, I saw Trotman answer that. But I would say good riddance to Rusal and everybody like Rusal who believe. You see, people don't understand how much people of African descent resent slavery and any slave-like conditions. People don't understand that. But we take a long time before it boils over. And a month ago or so, you saw what happens when it boils over. You saw what happened at the Aurora gold mine. You saw what happened. And therefore, I was happy to see smiling faces. I didn't yesterday's paper and today's, where they have now signed an agreement giving considerable benefits. Or I don't want to use the word considerable, better benefits. Better and more expansive benefits to the workers who got to go in their mines. People don't understand. People's life are shortened. When they're working underground mines, when they work with mercury and all this kind of stuff, their lifespan is shortened. And for you to be paying them chicken feed because you are paying slightly above what the government is paying, they should be thankful for that. Because they are investing in your country and instead of creating jobs, you should be thankful for that. We should not be using this. We should not be using this model any longer. Guyana does not depend anymore on carpet bargain type investments. We should say no to carpet bargain type investment. We should say no to any investment that ill-treats our workers. But when we don't say no, those people are emboldened to treat our people anyhow. And that is what had happened at Rusal. That is what had happened at Rusal's operations. And their coming back is a very foreboding. And I hope the unions, the Guyana Bauxite unions and Lincoln Lewis and all them, will sound the warning bell about their coming back. Or that if they are going to be coming back, it will be with a new and different attitude than what they had. That their coming back is in an economy that is substantially different, more improved than when we had to take what we get when they came here. But I hope the unions start singing and become part of that process of them coming back and operating in that Berbice River. For the time being, as far as I'm concerned, they could stay out. We are not slaves. Guyanese are not slaves. And African Guyanese have shed the yoke of slavery, at least physical slavery, and we will not be further enslaved. Whether it's by inhumane conditions, slave wages, or whatever. You know, you have the budget of $1.558 trillion. And last year of 1.4 plus trillion. And and up to last year, without counting this year's budget, the government would have spent close to, if not slightly above, $5 trillion between August of 2020 and the end of last year. $5 trillion. $5 trillion. That $5 trillion, my friend, when you look at certain human statistics, tell a very, very sad story. Tell a very sad story. What does it tell? For example, it tells that a minimum wage in Guyana, after the government would have spent $5 trillion over the last 5 years, the minimum wage in Guyana is a paltry $102,346. Yes, the monthly public minimum wage is $102,346. That's about $500 a month. A month. $500 a month. And our public sector brothers and sisters, can you imagine, are in a better position than their private sector counterparts, where the minimum wage in the private sector is $60,000. That's $300 a month. A month. And whereas the public servants have been given annual increases from 2022, because I didn't think they got any for 2021. I don't think the 2022, the private sector has got no increase in the minimum wage since it was raised to 60,000, I believe, just after 2020. Yes, in an economy where the government had access to and spent $5 trillion, the minimum wage is $102,346. Let's look at some other human statistics. Let's look at the crude birth rate per 1,000. The crude birth rate per 1,000 in 2021 was 8.4. But by 2025, it had dropped to 5.9. The crude death rate, happily, the crude death rate that was 5.4 per 1,000 in 2021 was 3, which suggesting less people dying at birth per 1,000. However, the infant mortality rate per 1,000 live birth, that's how many of 1,000 babies, how many died at birth, it was 9.3 in 2021. But it rose to 11 in 2025. So at the time when you spent your highest money in budget and the highest monies in the health sector, more babies were dying at birth in 2025 than they did in 2021. And notwithstanding the ever increasing amounts that are being spent in the health sector, infant mortality rate has remained a stubborn average of 10%, of 10 per 1,000 live births. In particular, 9.3 in 2021, 10 in 2022, 10 in 2023, 11 in 2024, and 11 in 2025. And even more telling statistic, the under 5 mortality rate, those who born, yes, they got past their infant, but expected to die before they reach 5, under 5 mortality rate per 1,000 live births per 1,000 lifeboats, the rate increased from 11.4 in 2021 to 14 in 2025. So more children under 5 are expected to die in 2025, were expected to die in 2025 than in 2021. Make them make sense. So these numbers tell a different story than what they are trying to picture there. All our nurses are leaving. Poor salary, minimum wage, 102,346. But I saw a letter up to yesterday written to, I think, my namesake, Vince Roy, where the nurses are complaining bitterly about the wide disparity in conditions, salary, allowances, treatment, and so on between the foreign nationals serving in the hospitals at Bath Settlement, I think it is, and the local nurses. And this is an experience throughout the health sector. I have heard these complaints, and the people are voting with their feet. And it seems this is a happy situation for certain elements in the government because they can then replace them with their kind. This is what the conclusion that people are coming to. The number of nurses per 10,000 declined from 36.6 in 2021 and a high of 37.9 in 2022 to 32.5 last year. A clear indication that the nurses can take it no more. The nurses can take it no more. They're going. They're gone. Many of them said they would love to come back, but not under the conditions that they left. Low birth weight, that is under 2,500 grams as a percent of live births. Low birth weight babies. Again, this is a stubborn statistic. It was 8.1 in 2021, and it was not much different in 2025 at 8. Right? At 8. Notwithstanding the massive sums of money, 6 regional hospitals, 6 more billion, massive health centers, and so on, you have these statistics that are stubborn. They're not moving. Right? Nutritional status of children under 5 as a percent of age group. All of this information is available in the budget speech, the fourth appendix in the budget speech. You can go there and you can pick up all of this information. The nutritional status of children under 5 as a percent of age group. The severely malnourished was 0.4% in 2021. That percentage increased to 0.5% last year. And it has remained consistently at that level. It was a high 0.7% in 2022. In 2022, and 0.5 for 2023, 24, and 25. The moderately malnourished children under 5 was 1% in 2021, and it had shot up to 1.5% last year. These statistics trending in the wrong direction. But the expenditure in the health sector has gone up massively every year. But these are the outcomes by which you must be able to measure expenditure. That is why Bigger doesn't mean better. Bigger does not mean improvement. Moderately malnourished, that was 1% in 2021, shot up to 1.5% by 2025. And so too overweight. Overweight children under 5. That was 1% in 2021 and 1.5% last year. All of these statistics show that the spending that is taking place in that sector, as in so many other sectors, not given the required relief. On the inflation, imagine in the this is a lot of guesswork. It got to be guesswork. In the half-year report that was presented to the Parliament in November, I think it was, or when the Parliament reopened, I think it was October, right? It was presented to the public in October. In that half-year report, based on inflation for the first half, it was projected that inflation will be 3.6%. Now imagine you were bringing out a half-year report in October. You're projecting inflation will be 3.6% for the whole year. But by the time you read the budget, inflation is no longer 3.6%, but 2.5%. Are they making up these numbers? Yeah? That's the question I'm asking. Are they making up these numbers? Are they making up these numbers? %2.5%. And guess what? They are projecting to spend $1.558 billion this year compared to the $1.4 billion last year. And they are going to get the exact identical 2.5% inflation again in 2026. Can you imagine? %2.5%. They are wanting you to believe inflation was last year. When the money supply, according to what is in the budget speech, increased by 29.4% to $1.4 trillion. Of course, when you adjust for the non-oil economy, which increased by 14.3%, as we said, there's about a 15% gap between the increase in the money supply and the increased growth in the non-oil economy. You see, that's why we don't deal with the whole economy, because the whole economy is too much influence, too much influenced by the oil economy. And the non-oil economy is where the bulk of the Guyanese trying to eke out an existence. Oil economy implies very few people. It is the non-oil economy that is expected to employ all the rest, right? So you got that 15 percentage point gap between the expansion in the oil economy and the expansion in the money supply. And that, my friends, is the source of the inflation in this country. And that is why nobody can convince you or me or anybody else that inflation was 2.5% last year. Yes, we understand inflation is an index, but something is radically wrong with the index. And we have said so a long time ago. That whole index needs to be scrapped, redone, right, out of a household income and expenditure survey, and a true one at that too. Because the government is happy for these low figures to be recorded. It makes them look good. But the lived reality of the people out there will tell you that none of them experience a 2.5% overall increase in their prices. None. None of them increase a 2.5% overall increase in the prices that they face. None of them. None. And so the classic definition of inflation of too much money chasing too few goods is precisely what you have in here. So don't tell us 2.5% inflation. Get your people out there to come and convince us that inflation last year was 2.5%. When you, at the half year, in a report that was made available to the public in October of last year, said that your projections based on everything that you saw, that inflation would have been 3.6%. Tell us what changed your mind between the period October, November, December. What earth-shattering developments happened between October, November, December to cause inflation then to be overall at 2.5%. And as I said before, the government is mainly responsible for fueling the inflation in this country. Of course, together with bank lending and all these kinds of things. And in many ways, the Bank of Guyana is abdicating its responsibility for targeting money supply and inflation growth in this country. They're abdicating the responsibility. The government is expanding its budget at such an alarming rate at a time when the goods and services cannot also be produced at that same rate. And even with imports, they still can't fill the gap. And they are contributing to the rising inflation in this country. I don't know why the government thinks that a budget has to be increased, has to show an increase every year. Because projects come to an end, and therefore the expenditure that you would normally have got over the previous umpteen years, you no longer have that. A budget that is lower than the previous year doesn't imply that we are going to grow negatively and so on. You have to be able to reprioritize, and you have to be able to reduce this climbing fiscal deficit that is going to hang like an albatross on the backs of the very 58% whose belt can't tighten anymore. They're on to skeleton right now. But the government not listening. The government not listening. Instead, the government is throwing a bone here and a bone there, hoping to quiet and quell the rising anger of people. That's what they're doing. So let us quickly look at some of the measures. Some. Can't go through all of them. Some of the measures. Let us look at some of these bones that have been thrown to us. Under the tax area, they propose to remove corporate income tax on agriculture and agro-processing business. They propose to increase the tax threshold, income tax threshold, from 130,000 to 140,000. And they are proposing to increase low-income mortgage ceiling from 20 million to 30 million. And they're going to extend this mortgage ceiling to insurance companies. But let's deal with the first one of removal of corporate income tax and increasing tax threshold from. Listen, we have said it before, we'll say it again. People will have confidence in a tax structure that is transparent, that is predictable, and in essence follows Adam Smith's 4 canons of taxation: easy to administer, and so on. If the government is going to tamper with the tax system every year at budget time in response to clamor by various stakeholders, it means that the tax system as it stands is not functioning. And the more you acquiesce to these demands for changes in the income tax system, is the more you're complicating the structure, is the more you're making the structure, the more you're destabilizing the structure, is the more work you're giving to the Guyana Revenue Authority to administer a structure with a wide-ranging exemptions here, exemptions there, adjustments here, there, and everywhere. The government has to complete a tax reform study instead of acquiescing every year for clamors to remove this, remove that, and so on. You are destroying the tax structure. When the oil is finished, you still have to depend on taxes to run the country and to repay debts that you have taken in a previous time period. Now, when you talk about removing corporate income tax on agriculture and agro-processing business, ask the GRA how difficult this is going to be. What is an agricultural business? Is Gaisuko an agricultural business? Are they going to be exempt from tax? I mean, they haven't paid any in God knows how long. They haven't. What will define an agricultural business? Suppose a person has they're into agri and some other thing. How do you define that? You are going to ask GRA now to go and find ways of finding if 51% of the business is more than agriculture or agriculture-related activities. You are making life difficult. And what if people are importing agri spares and agri equipment? Are they an agri business? They are importing and buying and selling. Why are you going to exempt them from income tax? And there are so many of those businesses here. They're importing tractors, they're importing spare parts, and they're making a profit, a killing. They're not taking any big risks. And now you are going to exempt them from income tax. And what is an agro-processing business anyhow? Do we have those in this country? I remember years ago we had Guyana orange juice and so on. We had GMC producing ham and bacon and so forth. Those are agro-processing stuff. But do we have these? Do we know how much money we are going to lose by way of income tax in this? The point is, as I said, you have to be able to have a tax system that has a reasonably low income tax and a tax system that rewards the effort and the risks in hinterland areas, rural areas, even in the agricultural area. But you can't just wake up and willy-nilly do this stuff without having before you a blueprint as to where these taxes will be. And when it comes to the withholding tax, I say it's good for y'all. The APNU had promised to raise that threshold to $400,000. Now, with that threshold, it would not have had to be removed in at least a decade. In at least a decade, because it would have been $400 or 1/3, whichever is greater. Whichever is greater. The bulk of the people work for $400 and less in this country. So it would have taken a substantial number of people out of the payroll. And it would have freed the GRA staff to concentrate on where they get their greatest revenues. Instead, you chopping and changing the threshold. Every year, you chopping and changing the threshold from 130 to 140, from 140 to 145, 145 to 150. That's how we're going, chopping and changing. There's no strategy. There's no strategy. And this is detrimental to the running of any society. People must be able to predict things. It's not because the private sector come to you and say, well, we'll be asking for increasing the income tax threshold. That is what the private sector said they were coming and asked for among their many asks. They're asking for increasing income tax threshold. Well, you get a $10,000 increase in the income tax threshold. Make that make sense. Make that make sense to a number of people. They are already below the threshold for at 130. A significant number of people are below 130 and below. They haven't been, they want paying taxes anyhow. So you moving it from 130 to 140, how does that help the average suffering person? And then, of course, you're complicating the tax structure with all kinds of different mortgage interest, child interest, dependent interest, income waivers, and so on. It's it's given GRA a hell of a problem, a hell of a work to do. And I thought they can free up staff to go over to the more important oil sector rather than having them concentrate on all these minutiae details as you complicate more and more the tax system. Then they talk about increasing the low-income mortgage ceiling. Well, Sharon, I hope you all read Sharon's letter. And I like his clap back to someone who was answering him. Totally missed the point. We raised this matter here before. Raising the mortgage ceiling increase, and this is what this is what the body speech said, increase in low-income mortgage ceiling from 20 million to 30 million. Low-income mortgage ceiling. My God, a low-income house is now $30 million. This is the admission of the government. A low-income house is $30 million. Who is likely to get a low-income house? A person on minimum wage or just above minimum wage? We calculated that the average payback for a loan of 30 million might be about 200 something thousand a month. We did this here a couple of weeks ago. We went through this, and perhaps I'll look back at it again next week when we have more time or some other time. But the long and short is, with a minimum wage of $102,348, who's going to be able to afford a $30 million low-income mortgage? Low-income mortgage. And why does the insurance company want to get into housing business? I know years ago, they were part of the housing, helping with the housing stock, and certainly assisted back in the Bornham FCH. They were part of the lending, but I thought they were out of that. And the only reason that they want a piece of this action is because of perhaps the low returns that they are getting on their investments of their pension funds and other funds. Because what people don't seem to know or don't recall is that the government is subsidizing the housing and the mortgage rates to the banks. The government is subsidizing it via write-offs from the income tax. So maybe now the insurance company wants to get in. the government has distorted the housing market to such an extent that the banks don't fear to lend. And as much, in other words, that the risks of the banks have reduced considerably because they will get the difference between what they would have lent and what they are lending at by right down from their income tax. Income, chargeable income. So the insurance company perhaps lobbied, and as an intermediary, they want to get into. So I'm not surprised. There's no shortage of funds in the commercial banks itself. There might be shortage of takers because while, as Cheryl rightly showed, you have 26,000 people still waiting for a service lot. They can't go to the bank and borrow because they don't have a piece of paper in their hand. So read Sarah Duncan's letter and read his response also in today's paper. Then they're proposing to remove VAT. Again, at a general level, I will say this. The last reduction in VAT was under the coalition government from 16% to 14%. And the manifesto, I believe, of the APNU promised a further reduction of VAT to, I think, 12% or something below. But this is the point I will make. Again, the continuous tampering with the VAT suggests that people are uncomfortable. The VAT came into being 2000 and whatever, and it's about time that, and now that resources are available, it's time for that VAT to be reconsidered, re-examined, and avoid continuous tampering and again acquiescing to requests for exemptions. Whenever there are requests for exemption, it's signifying that either the VAT is onerous, or both in terms of collection, administration, and it's affecting profitability and so on. Be that as it may, my point is, again, you need to do some work where that is concerned. And my initial recommendation is to reduce the VAT to a level, maybe no more than 10%. Maybe no more than 10%. Then you introduce a rate that will cover activities like hotels, tourism, and so on. Those are the only two rates you'll have, whether it's a 5% or whatever. And then you have zero rate, three rates, 0, 5, and maybe 10. And remove all exemptions and broaden the list, making life easy for the GRA people. And that's it. Nobody coming back anymore and asking for exemption from this, exemption from that. That is what I will recommend them to do. But every time a budget comes, you expect the private sector to come and say, I want more VAT reduction on this. I want VAT reduction on that. I want income tax removed from this. And eventually, when you are going to say no, or when are you going to put in place a structure that is has more a level of prominency in it, that does not have to have this thing? Do you see in Barbados or in Trinidad, or everywhere else, everybody every minute waking up and tampering with the tax system in the way how they tamper with the tax system here? Do you see that? Now, let me put a word of caution down to the government. I don't know if they missed it, but here goes. I note that the government says that they are going to be removing VAT on, get this, locally manufactured furniture and local manufactured jewelry. What is it that this government didn't learn? When we were taken to court by is it Rusida or whatever, in relation to the application of the environmental tax. When is it that what it is that we didn't learn. We paid dearly, billions we paid because we applied the tax discriminately. Rusido and them drinks, they pay the tax. But we didn't apply it to the local banks and DDLs and whoever else were importing or manufacturing locally. Now you gone and announced that you are going to be removing VAT on local furniture and local jewelry. What it is that you haven't learned. If you're going to remove the VAT on local furniture, you also have to remove the VAT on imported furniture. And you're going to have to remove the VAT on imported jewelry. You cannot discriminate. The CCJ decision is final where that is concerned. We can't discriminate in that manner. If you want to assist local furniture, you could do like what we did and what I don't know, yes, what we did. When we were selling rice to the European Union, we were under obligation to collect a levy called the rice levy. But had we collected that levy, the farmer would not have found the European Union market to be of interest to them anymore. But the European Union says we have to show that we collected the levy. So we did what was called an in and out. We showed it at the top that we collected the rice levy, and at the bottom, we showed giving back the rice farmer the levy. That was good enough for them. They know we weren't collecting it, but it was good enough for them to show their court of auditors and so on. Here, you're going to have to continue applying the VAT to the local furniture and so on, and find a mechanism, if you really want to help these people, of returning what you collect from them back to them. But you cannot openly in a budget go out and say you are going to remove the VAT on local furniture. It will have to be removed on all furniture of same make and everything else. Both imports and local production have to be treated in a similar manner. So that is one for you to think about. Then there is two quick ones, and then I close out. The Development Bank. The Development Bank. Well, we went through that Development Bank story. The only observation I will make now is this. Up to early this year, the government talked about establishing the Development Bank and capitalizing it at 200 million US. Then suddenly you see it has been chopped to 100 million US. Are these things really studied? Are they studied? Are they really studied? I would think anyhow 100 million US dollars is way too much given the size of the market and given who you are targeting. Because the Development Bank is not meant to replace the commercial banks. 100 million every 5 million gives you 1 billion in Guyana. So 100 million is 20 something billion Guyana dollars. And you remember the Development Bank is lending to micro, small, and medium. Okay? And you're lending without collateral and you're not collecting back interest and so on. 20 billion is a huge sum of money to be lending to micro, small, and medium businesses. I don't even think you have the capacity to lend such money. But you are the one who started out saying we are going to capitalize this bank at 200 million US dollars. Now you're down to 100 million. Now you're down to 100 million. And still, we don't have any idea of the shape, size, structure, or anything of this development bank. We haven't even seen a green paper or a white paper on this development bank. Bearing in mind the experiences of other development banks like Guy Bank, GNCB Trust was a kind of development bank too. And what's that other bank? The Mortgage Finance Bank. bearing in mind the experiences there. We have not seen a white paper in the public domain telling us about how this bank is going to function and so on. Which, in a related thing also, the government talks about a housing improvement subsidy of $7.5 billion. Again, this is a problem. This must be a problem, and I hope people see through. These, in the budget, there are sums of money, right? They're omnibus. There are no details. There's no fleshing out of any details and so on. There's these broad sums of money that are being used by the government to favor their supporters and their people. A $7.5 billion housing subsidy where there are no regulations as to how this operates, how you can apply for it and all these kind of things. None. There has been no report, because this subsidy has been being given year after year. There has been no report done by the Auditor General on this subsidy, especially who is benefiting from this subsidy. There's no report. There's not even a little report where the Auditor General will pick, say, 100 of the recipients and go and check to see whether they have completed their houses, whether they have completed their infrastructure, whether they have used this thing, or whether they have sold back this stuff. Nothing. There's been no report. And then who is benefiting? Who are the hardware stores that are benefiting from these subsidies? People got to speak up. People got to speak up. There's a lot of money in that budget. The fat is so much. The fat in the budget is so much. Right? As to make poor barrel politics in the United States and them look like swine. There's so much fat that can be cut out of that budget and bring it back to lean. But it is all of these 7.5 billion for this, 9 billion for that, 12 billion for that, this amount for the force lady, and all these kind of things. Fat, tremendous fat. A seal and them will watch on admiringly at the level of fat that is in this budget and wonder why they, who should be carrying blubber and so on, why they can't get that kind of fat. A lot of fat in that budget. And then, of course, they favored us, not with the promises of $60,000 pension, but with a $5,000 pension increase from $41,000 to $46,000. And a $20,000 whole year grant to be distributed. I don't know. I don't know whether they are going to take 20,000 divided by 12 and give you 1,800 plus every month, or whether they are going to give you 20,000 in March, or they're going to give you in December, and I don't know. But this is lazy man economics and lazy man politics. Foolish politics. First of all, who you fooling by giving them $20,000? You know, some people saying, well, what are you complaining for? You ain't had nothing before. Well, that is the attitude we'll take. We should always take what they give we, because we feel that they're doing we a favor. That is the attitude when you feel you're being captured by the government instead of you letting the government know. $20,000 transportation. That's $100 US, by the way. Less than $100 US for an entire year for a pensioner. Because the government refuses to do what modern governments do. Provide easy, safe, accessible transportation for their elderly citizens, for their children, for the vulnerable, for the disabled and population and so on. They are refusing to do that. But instead, they're going to offer you a $20,000. They take away the 5B program that gave free transportation to all school children, free boat, comfortable boats for those in the hinterland and so on. They took that away in preference now to $20,000 transportation now. Now, in the name of equity, how you gonna give a child in Georgetown $20,000 for transportation and give them one in the interior who got a paddle boat and so on, the same $20,000? How in the name of equity you're gonna do that? Eh? And this is lazy man policy. Lazy man policy. Lazy. Lazy. And then, and then of course, the public assistance, they gone up from 22,000 to 25, a mere 3,000. But back to that old age pension. I have been saying this, and remember, I think it's last year, we raised the issue of this creeping increase in the old age pension numbers. This thing gone as far back as Sheila Holder of blessed memory, who raised this matter, I think it was in the 8th Parliament, of these numbers. What is cooking in these numbers? Now you're hearing that we have 95,000 old age pensioners, when only recently the number was 76,000 that was causing a lot of problems. Something is cooking. But I can say without fear of contradiction that that list of pension includes a number of people who should not be getting pension, old age pension. That list is heavily compromised. It contains a number of people who have been assisted to get onto the list. They have been assisted to get onto the list. And again, the Attorney General, who seems unfazed by the fact that this number of old people increased from 76,000 the year before to 95,000. If we have such an aging population, then we have to be concerned about what policies we are putting in place for replacement and for an aging population. An aging population becomes a more dependent population. And so the question is what we are doing in terms of putting system in place for this dependency. And of course, again, we have our famous cash grant. That, thanks Sister Annette, she was able to get the photograph at Rasville, I passed it this morning, and showed where they said they were going to give you 200,000. It was right there on the billboard. 200,000. Now it's down to 100,000. It's down to 100,000. It's down to 100,000. And their mathematics seem to be a rather static one because they're budgeting against $60 billion. The same $60 billion that they say it's going to cost, but it costs more when they were distributing last year. They budgeted another $60 billion this year. But I thought they got access to the census. But I'm telling you all, this might be the very last cash grant you're getting. Because when you claim it as a cash grant, it comes as if it's a benevolence being doled out by the government. It's a grant, a benevolent transfer. But if it was framed as a cash benefit, grounded in a law, then we would understand that we are sharing in the resource, quote unquote, oil we were sharing via a dividend or whatever else. And this would have been grounded in law. And this dividend, how much to be shared will depend on how much was earned, or the price, or whatever the case may be. But because it's not grounded in law, It's grounded in those people's benevolence to determine whether you will get a cash grant or not. I can tell you, I smell that given the circumstances that are coming up in relation to oil and so on, that this may very well be your last cash grant for a while. They're paying this one, not so much out of a promise, but because this is local government elections year. And so that cash grant will be paid out closer to when the local government elections. But then 3 years afterwards is the next local government that is also be close to the next general elections. I would rather be wrong than right in this circumstance, but I smell that I could be right. And if my bringing this to the fore make them change their mind about it, I'll be quite happy. But we can't continue doling out cash grants outside of a framework of social assistance to the poor, needy, vulnerable, and so on. And outside of an economic program that helps to pull these people, or several of them, out of their current status into a less dependent status. There will always be vulnerables, the young, the babies, the infants, the disabled, the indigent. They'll always be disabled. But some of not disabled, they'll always be vulnerable and poor section side. But many of them in there, they just need a push and economic assistance to move them away from a dependent status to a less dependent, ultimately an independent status. We can't continue to present a picture where it is felt that the only way we can survive in a high-cost economy is by the benevolence of the government, the very government that is causing the massive increase in the cost of living, the same government that is causing that through the ill-advised fiscal and monetary policies that they are pursuing. And they are tempering these with these little one-off, sugar-coated one-outs that bear no resemblance to what the ordinary person is thinking. When the government has to go back to measures that they implemented 3, 4, 5 years ago and restate them in the budget speech, measures baby grant, right? We didn't even know if the baby grant still given. CIF, they're using CIF values that are 2021 values or something like that. And then there's another one. Oh, the no taxes on fuel and so on. Those things have been there for long. People get accustomed to that now. You don't get a problem now when you try to put them back on. But for the time being, what are you restating them for in 2026 budget? Those things not benefit for people anymore. They get accustomed to that. If you try removing it, you will see the pushback you will get. But we don't need these crumbs that are being handed out and doled out as the government see fits. We need a social assistance policy. And I thought you take a big loan. You took a big loan from the IDB to put in place a social assistance framework. What has happened to that loan and what has happened to the framework? All these little grants that you're giving out and so on, which are more political than economic or welfare, should form part of that comprehensive social assistance framework that must go side by side with an economic empowerment framework. It's not to wean on people onto government welfare, it's to wean them off of that, including pensioners. Pensioners don't like this have to depend on you, every year for them to buy the tablet and all this kind of story. And don't tell us about no free health and how many hospitals and so on you're building and so forth. That has not translated. It has not translated. I read up some of the numbers there, the nutritional side. It has not translated into any reduction in expenditure of the average person. We still got to depend on the children. We still got to depend on the diaspora to send us a little fine change for us to pay medical over here, whether it's the private hospitals or the private doctors and so on. But anyway, Kidaki, I got another program today. Oh, before I go, I must lament that the last time that we got an increase in the NIS was 2019 under the coalition government. This is the 6th year of this government, and there is no end in sight to this pain and suffering that's being inflicted on NIS pensioners. I think we have had enough of this. We are faced with the brunt of the attack on this, and something has to give. Once again, there's been no announcement of an increase in NIS pension. And finally, it seems that we are back to the status quo where the public servants, there's no announcement of any increase, interim or otherwise, in their salaries. And therefore, they will have to wait until November or early December before they know whether they can get an increase because it's in the budget, but they can know how much they will get. So we're back to that. After they recognized last year's Christmas was dull, they said, okay, we are going to be giving back salary increases towards the end of the year, not during the year when these people got to face these multitude of costs of living expenses and so on. Anyway, that's so much that we can do for today, Kodaki, and I'm glad that there was no complaints about the quality of the program. I hope you got a mouthful and you will digest.